This hearing of the Subcommittee on the Western Hemisphere, Transnational Crime, Civilian Security, Democracy, Human Rights, and Global Women's Issues will come to order. The title of this hearing is Democracy and Human Rights, the Case for U.S. Leadership. We're going to have two panels testifying today. The first will feature Mr. Carl Gershman, President of the National Endowment for Democracy, the Honorable Mark Green, the President of the International Republican Institute, and Mr. Kenneth Wallach, who's the President of the National Democratic Institute. All have long and distinguished careers in this field, and we're fortunate to have them here today. The second panel will include Mr. Gary Kasparov, who is the chairman of the Human Rights Foundation, Dr. Hala Aldasari, a visiting scholar and human rights activist, and Mr. Danilo El Sexto Maldonado Machado, who is a Cuban artist and human rights activist. Each of these individuals have suffered some form of oppression, harassment, or marginalization by their governments, and I am confident the stories they will share today will shine a powerful light on those who attempt to violate the human rights and the freedom that every person is entitled to. We look forward to hearing your testimony. We thank everyone in attendance for being here. I specifically want to acknowledge the leadership of NED's core institutes representing labor and business, Shauna Bader-Blau and Andrew Wilson. Today we'll discuss a topic which I believe is especially timely, not simply because we are at the start of a new administration, which continues to formulate its foreign policy, but also because a cursory glance around the globe reveals disturbing trends of an authoritarian resurgence threatening human rights and democracy. From Russia to China, from North Korea to Venezuela, authoritarianism is on the rise. Human freedom is under assault, and restrictive new NGO laws are being used to crush civil society. Press freedom is being challenged. Just yesterday, we saw the expulsion of CNN and Español from Venezuela, and political dissidents often feel isolated and abandoned, while those who repress them do so with seeming impunity. Many of our historic alliances with other leading democracies are fraying, while authoritarian regimes are closely collaborating and empowering other dictators. Some of the world's most egregious human rights violators retain well-paid lobbyists and PR firms. They engage in sophisticated expressions of soft power in the media, through so-called think tanks and academia and even the entertainment industry. It feels like freedom fighters are constantly playing catch-up. Earlier this month, Vladimir Kara-Murza of Open Russia was suspected of being poisoned for a second time. I understand that he is now recovering and will hopefully be released from the hospital shortly. He has been a target of the Russian government for some time. Later this month, on February 27th, will be the second anniversary of the assassination of his close ally, Boris Nemtsov, who was murdered in view of the Kremlin after speaking out against Russia's aggression in Ukraine and Vladimir Putin's corruption. We invited his daughter, Zana Nepsova, to testify today, but she was unable to attend due to prior commitments. I would, however, like to enter into the record a report from her organization detailing the figures of political prisoners in Russia. In the seminal work, The Case for Democracy, famed Soviet dissident Natan Sharansky divides nations into free and fear societies. He writes, quote, "A simple way to determine whether the right to dissent in a particular society is being upheld is to apply the town square test. Can a person walk into the middle of the town square and express his or her views without fear of arrest, imprisonment, or physical harm? If he can, then that person is living in a free society, and if not, it's a fear society." End quote. For the Chinese lawyer, the Russian journalist, the Saudi blogger, the Venezuelan activist, the Cuban artist, the Bahraini civil society leader, there is no question. They are living in fear societies. Their attempts to freely, and I would add courageously, express themselves are met with harsh and unyielding repression. Civil rights champion, the Reverend Martin Luther King, Jr., famously said, Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." As the title of today's hearing makes clear, I believe, and I think it is safe to say that Ranking Member Menendez agrees as well, that there is indeed a convincing case to be made for strong, principled U.S. leadership in the promotion and support of democracy and human rights globally on this moral imperative alone. I recognize this is not a universal belief. It never has been, even during the heyday of the Soviet Union, and certainly it isn't now when there is no monolith enemy or single ideological counterpart to the free world. While the American people remain among the most generous in the world, widely giving to charitable causes both domestically and internationally, altruism or even the moral impetus to stand with the oppressed and marginalized is insufficient motivation for many, especially when they consider our own decrepit infrastructure, our shuttered factories, our mounting national debt, and other priorities here at home. So for those of us who believe in the merits of this work, the burden is on us to make the case for why U.S. foreign policy must be infused with the values at the center of our own experiment in self-governance. It is incumbent upon us to explore and explain why the support of emerging democracies should be a core U.S. national interest, precisely because it is a national security imperative, and I hope today's hearing will provide a platform to do so. We need not abandon any notion of realpolitik. I recently read a National Review piece that captured a conversation that Mr. Kasparov had with Czech writer and dissident Václav Havel, in which Havel noted, now and then you have to negotiate with evil regimes, but you don't have to do so without bringing up human rights. Take Ronald Reagan. He negotiated with the Soviet Union about arms control and geopolitics, but he always put political prisoners on the table. With the previous administration, these issues took a back seat to other geopolitical goals, whether it was greater collaboration with China on climate change and the global economic crisis, or the resumption of diplomatic relations with the tyranny in Cuba, or the prospects of a grand bargain with Iran. Dissidents in these and other countries often felt ignored and forgotten by the United States. My critique is not reserved for a Democratic administration. I raised these issues with our Secretary of State, our new Secretary of State during his confirmation hearing, and I was concerned and remain about the way he addressed them. I intend to continue to highlight the importance of democracy and human rights as senior State Department nominees come before our committee for consideration. And as I stated when I voted for Mr. Tillerson, my support of or opposition to those nominees will be based in part on their willingness to make these issues a priority. I believe it is vital for the Secretary, for his deputies, for senior White House officials, including the President and Vice President, to meet publicly with dissidents and human rights activists, as President Trump and Vice President Pence did last night with Lilian Tintori, the wife of Venezuelan opposition figure Leopoldo Lopez. It is essential that the leaders of the world's greatest democracy issue statements of support and solidarity, and where appropriate, condemnations when grave human rights abuses occur. I urge the administration to request robust democracy funding for such work in the upcoming budget cycle, and to utilize recently passed legislation from the previous Congress, which provides the State Department new tools to advance the cause of human rights and human dignity. Foremost among them, the Global Magnitsky Act, which the ranking member was so involved in. Writing eloquently and ominously in the Wall Street Journal last year, one of our witnesses, Mr. Kasparov, noted, globalization has made it easy for the enemies of the free world to spread their influence in ways the Soviet leadership couldn't have imagined, while the West has lost the will to defend itself and its values. I pray this warning is not borne out by reality. Consider the contrast with Natan Sharansky's account of being held in an 8 by 10-foot cell in a Siberian prison in 1983, when his Soviet jailers allowed him to read the latest issue of the official Communist Party newspaper. Sharansky recalled a front-page article condemning Reagan's famous evil empire speech, and he wrote, tapping on the walls and talking through toilets, political prisoners spread the word of Reagan's so-called provocation. The dissidents were ecstatic. Finally, the leader of the free world had spoken the truth, a truth that burns inside the heart of each and every one of us. I believe we are at an inflection point, and that the stakes could not be higher, as we will no doubt hear today. We must commit anew to a robust defense of our values, because they are not merely American values. Rather, they reflect the yearning of millions of people around the world who live in societies dominated by fear and oppression, but who look to the United States of America to champion their cause, to fully exercise their God-given rights. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses. You have experience in the field and on the ground that will contribute greatly to what can so easily become abstract policy discussions. I turn now over to the ranking member, Senator Menendez.